Though short-lived in its existence, the Summerland Centre on the Isle of Man was a disaster waiting to happen, as a flawed design meant the stage was set for one of the worst fires in British history, a tragedy which, in light of more recent events, proved to be disturbingly prescient. The story of the Summerland Centre begins in the late 1960s, as due to the rise in budget holidays and tours to Mediterranean destinations, including southern Spain, France and North Africa, traditional British seaside resorts were starting to lose their lower and middle-class customer base. As British beaches and temperatures, both in and out of the water, could not compete with the more favourable climates of the foreign competition, the decision was made to bring the warm seas and breezes to the UK through the creation of climate-controlled indoor leisure centres, one of which was the Summerland proposal on the Isle of Man. The location of Summerland was on a plot that had been associated with holiday-making since the late 1800s, when a tourist village was built around the grounds of a folly, or a large house masquerading as a medieval castle, called Derby Castle, a site so popular that it was even provided its own station as the terminus of the Manx Electric Railway in 1893. The Derby Castle site was at its peak during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, featuring an entertainment centre, including a theatre, ballroom, restaurant, bar, roller coaster and fireworks displays, and saw near constant use throughout the early 1900s, with only brief interludes during the two world wars, when the entertainment centre was employed as a factory and for the storage of valuables from hotels that were used as internment camps, while in 1945 the property was fully redeveloped with a brand new entertainment centre designed to reignite interest as more holidaymakers chose Mediterranean package holidays. Sadly, by the 1960s, Derby Castle, like many UK beachside resorts, was seeing diminishing incomes, and thus the Isle of Man Development Company proposed the creation of an indoor leisure centre that was not restricted to the often changeable nature of British weather, with discussions between the developers and local politicians resulting initially in the proposal for a swimming bath complex. The entire project was to comprise three fundamental parts: the aquadrome, which featured two heated seawater pools with stadium seating, as well as a sauna, steam room, cold plunge pool and Turkish baths, a multi-storey car park, and the Summerland building, which would provide entertainment space, restaurants, cafes, and a sea view outdoor terrace. The first element to open was the aquadrome, which was finished by 1969, but had faced construction issues as one of the walls of the building was backed directly against the cliff face, thus requiring the entire cliff having to be bolted together in order to stabilise it. The Summerland venue, meanwhile, was given planning permission in 1965, but didn't begin construction until 1968, which itself was disrupted in 1969 and 1970 due to disagreements over the internal layout and proposed tenants, eventually resulting in discussions going on for so long that in order to avoid construction and budget overruns, the council-run Douglas Corporation would only require the construction company to deliver the building's shell, which was completed in December 1970, while the tenant would create the internal structure. Design of the building was handed to native Manx architect James Phillips Lomas, with the assistance of colleague Brian Gelling, but due to Lomas having a lack of experience when designing a building of this type, Gelling chose to employ the services of British firm Gillinson Barnett and Partner, a company that had previously developed leisure centres on the mainland UK, and were appointed as associate architects for the Summerland Aquadrome project. Problems began, though, as Lomas and Gelling designed the external shell of the building, and Gillinson Barnett and Partners worked on the interior layout, but due to inconsistent design choices made between the two architects and the construction firm, the network of stairwells and fire escapes for the shell didn't match the internal configuration of the building, with the architects claiming that the details of escape in case of fire could not have been considered because the kind of occupancy, usage and activities for the Summerland building hadn't been decided by that point due to there being no tenant. In their pursuit to provide a completely weatherproof structure, Gillinson Barnett and Partners proposed employing the then highly innovative building material polymethyl methacrylate sheeting, which was sold under the name Oroglass, and was adopted in quantities never used before in a public building, covering the entire roof and two of the walls. While this acrylic panelling was far more aesthetically pleasing than the more traditional council concrete, the manufacturers of Oroglass were fully aware the material was highly combustible, but information as to its flammability was not shared with the Isle of Man's chief fire officer, while knowledge as to the material's ability to catch fire meant that building codes in the United States required a comprehensive sprinkler system be installed wherever Oroglass was used on a large scale, but again, this information was kept from fire officials. It was in this that a variety of fire and safety regulations were waived during construction, with the use of Oroglass being permitted by request of Lomas on the condition that, while Oroglass did not have a fire resistance of 2 hours, it would theoretically soften and fall out of its frames, thereby allowing people to escape through the gridwork of the walls. Another material flaw in the design was the use of colour galbestos, a rolled steel sheet coated in bitumen and asbestos, which was used in place of concrete or regular steel sheeting to save costs, and was permitted due to a breakdown in communication between the Douglas Corporation and the local government board, who received plans that included the use of colour galbestos, but without being notified that its use required waivers in the fire safety laws, and thus the chief fire officer was never consulted about this potentially lethal material, compounded further by the use of the combustible plastic-coated fiberboard Decalin for the interior wall of the amusement arcade, a last-minute decision made by the architects, ignorant to the fact it was flammable. Immediately following the construction of the shell in December 1970, the Douglas Corporation allowed the UK Hotel Group, Trust House Forte or THF, a 21-year lease to run the Summerland venue, while the Douglas Corporation itself remained in charge of the Aquadrome, but the division in management for the two parts of the same complex meant that customers would have to buy separate tickets to enter either the Summerland or Aquadrome buildings, which were also deprived of direct internal access. Initial reactions following the building's opening on July 16, 1971 were mixed, with many praising the venue's attractions, including children's entertainment and play facilities, cafes, restaurants, bars, amusement arcades, bingo, shuffleboard, artificial waterfalls, a tanning room, shops, and a solarium, but criticising the overall design. Regardless, Summerland was extremely popular, and for 1970s holidaymakers, the idea of a leisure centre on the Isle of Man provided a far cheaper alternative to package tours to continental Europe, being only a short flight or ferry ride from the mainland, but providing the warmth and enjoyment of a Mediterranean beach resort. Sadly, the party at Summerland was very short, ending abruptly on the rainy evening of August 2, 1973, when, during a variety show being watched by over 2,000 people, a trio of young boys were smoking cigarettes inside the disused mini-golf kiosk which lay up against the galbestos part of the promenade wall. At around 7:40 p.m, a discarded match set fire to the kiosk, and despite early efforts by the three boys in trying to extinguish it, the blaze was soon beyond their control, and they ran away in fear, causing the flames to quickly spread to the colour galbestos facade of the Summerland structure. The use of galbestos instead of steel meant the fire quickly broke through the wall and ignited the combustible Decalin that lined the entertainment spaces, rapidly spreading the blaze along the eastern end of the building between the two walls, with 1,000-degree flames coursing through the structure within the space of 6 to 8 minutes, roaring across the ceiling of the arcade, while the breached inner wall channeled the frigid air of the Irish Sea into the building, fueling the inferno and igniting the Oroglass promenade wall alongside the flying staircase. The rate at which the fire propagated through the building meant that no warnings or alarms were sounded, with most of the guests only becoming aware of the blaze when it burst into the main entertainment rooms, sparking a panic that resulted in terrified holidaymakers and staff being crushed as they ran for the few available exits, some of which were locked, as were the two main entrance doors, all while molten plastic rained down into the solarium. As toxic smoke filled the halls, people became lost in the maze-like corridors and venue spaces of the building, exacerbated further by the manager turning off the lights in the vain hope that it might prevent any electrical fires from erupting elsewhere, only to find that the emergency lighting failed to switch on for unknown reasons, while due to the promenade and kids' play areas being on separate floors, distressed parents attempted to find their way downstairs to rescue their children, but were thwarted when the stairwells became blackened chimneys. 20 minutes after the fire began, the Douglas fire station was informed, first by a passing taxi, then by a boat out in the harbour, but even after the fire engines had arrived, the scale of the disaster playing out before them was beyond anything they were equipped to handle, their main focus shifting from trying to extinguish the blaze to stopping the aquadrome from igniting as well. Eventually, an hour and a half after the blaze started, the fire was under control, once all the plastic facings and decorations had been burnt out, leaving a charred shell, 80 injured, and 50 dead, the fatalities being attributed to the effects of the fire, and the crush that occurred as people desperately tried to escape the inferno. In May 1974, a final report on the Summerland fire attributed the disaster to a combination of inappropriate materials used, the open-plan design, insufficient staircases and exits, and the untrained, inexperienced staff who hesitated in evacuating the building when the blaze first began in the outdoor mini-golf kiosk, while also scrutinizing other flaws in the fire safety provision of the centre, including locked fire escapes and internal alarms that failed to sound even after the public alarm points had been activated, but this was attributed to the fire having already burned through the wiring, thus rendering it inoperable. In the end, no specific groups or individuals were blamed for the disaster, and the coroner's verdict issued death by misadventure for the 50 victims, causing anger amongst those who had lost loved ones in the blaze, while the 3 boys who had broken into the kiosk to smoke were charged for damaging the lock, and thus forced to pay a fine of £3, or £32 in 2021. Following the disaster, changes to building regulations improved fire safety, but the use of polymer-based cladding on building facades continued, and would later play a pivotal role in the devastating Grenfell Tower fire of June 14, 2017, when the 24-storey Grenfell Tower in Kensington, West London, was consumed by a blaze exacerbated by exterior cladding that led to the deaths of 72 people. As for the Summerland Centre, the ruined steel skeleton of the building was eventually torn down in 1975 and replaced in 1977 by a smaller structure, which would stand until severe flooding caused by torrential rainfall in October 2002 resulted in two 50-ton concrete blocks that had once supported the roof of the original building becoming unstable, with the potential that they might collapse onto the Summerland Centre. With no way to remove them without bringing down the entire cliff face, the site was closed in 2004 and demolished in January 2006, while all that remains are elements of the west wall that are physically integrated into the cliffs, an everlasting memorial that is not only ingrained into the landscape of the Isle of Man, but also into the consciousness of modern architecture as one of the worst building fires in British history.